Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 9, Better Off Chats. My name is Alan, and I'm joined by the man who is bad at metaphors, but great at podcasting. It's Magellan.
Hey, I was kind of hoping you would go for it and just use the original form of the quote, but
Bad at metaphors, good at sex.
Yeah, that's, I guess, more family-friendly and less presumptuous. It still is weird for the folks out there who listen to My Brother, and Me that every episode starts with the bit where Travis claims he's a sexpert, but I haven't seen his award or whatever.
On his wall. I haven't seen it.
Why do they still use that? Anyway,
because making a new intro is hard, and every week I struggle to write something to call you.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I guess it's grandfathered in at this point, but it's funny to think about how, like, you make a joke, the first time you do your podcast, and then you're now 500 episodes in or something.
You're trapped. And now you have a kid, and you're still being like, I'm not a sexpert.
Right. So this is me saying that I'm not a sexpert. I'm not a rapper. But maybe
you could be a rapper. I've heard you freestyle rap before, and here it is. Here's a clip.
Yo, yo, hold on. Woo, wang, Hey.
That was awesome. Thank you so much for that, Magellan. I really appreciate the elegant rapping. Who knows what I put in there?
It's really
boundless potential right now.
Really gonna punt that one to the editor and see what happens.
Thanks, Editor Alan. Really appreciate the hard work you're doing here on Chats, a television podcast. It's a TV show podcast where we watch TV shows and talk about them. We, the two TV nerds, Alan and Magellan. This week, we are continuing our journey through the 2009 sitcom Better Off Ted by discussing Season 1, Episodes 3 and 4. First off, we're going to be discussing Episode 3 of Season 1, Through Rose-Colored Hazmat Suits. This episode was written by Justin Adler and Victor Fresco. It was directed by Michael Fresco, and it originally aired April 1st, 2009. Magellan, what happened in Through Rose-Colored Hazmat Suits?
In this episode, when Ted's nanny calls out sick, he's forced to take his 10-year-old daughter, Rose, to work with him. There, Veronica bonds with her and shows the youngster firsthand about running a corporation in the mean-spirited way. In a mean-spirited way, I guess. Or in the mean-spirited way.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to deliver that.
You can use your favorite intonation there. Meanwhile, Ted tries to find out where he stands with whatever romance he has with Linda.
Boo.
Boo to the romance, not boo to Linda. Linda's cool.
Yes.
Linda's ex-boyfriend arrives in town and shows up at the office wanting to spend the day with her.
No thanks.
Linda.
Deborah, Linda. Yeah, just to clarify, Linda's one of my favorite characters in the show. I think Andrea, her last name, Andrea Anders, is awesome. But I just don't need love triangles in my sitcom. I don't need it.
Yeah. So let's. What do you think of the episode overall? I guess before we break it down.
I really like this one. I think the second episode, pairing for us on these full seasons of Chats is always a decider for me of do I feel comfortable just sitting down and putting this show on and watching it? And for me, this one was, I think, Friday evening. It was 11 o'clock, and I was like, I'm kind of tired. I don't really feel like doing anything engaging. I think I'll just throw on Better Off Ted. And the show really works for that. It's very watchable and enjoyable and funny. It's still pretty thought-provoking. I'd say I'm on a higher level than your average simple romantic cable sitcom or whatever. But it's not gigantic brained. It's not like you have to reconfigure how you think about TV for Better Off Ted. It's just a fun show, and I think this episode is again jam-packed full of jokes, full of quotable bits, and moves the story along in a nice way. It's a great one. Mm-hmm. What did you think?
Yeah, I my feeling in this one and the next one was essentially the feeling that Better Off Ted belongs in that pantheon of sitcoms that are that make you have the reaction of, oh, this is really clever what's happening right now. I am laughing out loud at points, but constantly throughout the whole episode, I'm aware of the craft of what's going on and how good it is. So Arrested Development, or I think 30 Rock and in a lot of its episodes belongs there as well. The Good Place, I think, too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, those all are shows that when you watch them, like, you're laughing, but you're also thinking, whoa, that's a really smart way to pair these characters together, or they're exploring different aspects of this theme in a way that I didn't expect, but I think is cool, or like that shot was interesting, you know. So for both of these episodes, I had that feeling, like you're saying, it is the kind of like decider for us, episodes 3 and 4, of, you know, the tone of the rest of the chat season. And I think that these definitely decided for me, like, okay, the reason that we're watching Better Off Ted is because it belongs in the same tier as a lot of those other shows, but just isn't really as widely seen or widely discussed, and so that's why we're here. So I liked them both, and I liked this one a lot. I thought it was really smart.
Right. It opens on a scene in a daycare, and the work daycare, where Ted is Ted starting by trying to find a place to drop Rose off, basically.
Yeah, he gives us his little narration, like, oh, the nanny wasn't there, and then he says something about his ex-wife leaving them again, and it's
She
like,
went off
what,
to Africa specifically.
yeah, it's like, what is this? I still feel like that's a weird note, but anyway. And then, yeah, he takes her to the daycare because he's like, I can't watch her all day. And then realizes that the daycare is this sort of like Orwellian hellscape, where all of the children are being prepared and trained for their eventual roles in a corporation like Viridian Dynamics.
Yeah.
They're dressed up as like little scientists or little janitors or whatever, and the daycare teacher lady is like, hey, we're gonna paint the lines in the parking structure and stuff.
It's a lot of lines. And she's like,
yeah.
no, just the dividers.
Right. And so I thought that was a really funny scene, and a good way to kind of like skewer school, I think, and education through the lens of this corporate show, where like we're never going to go to a school, but we can still talk about the ways that education is kind of at this point inextricably tied to late stage capitalism, and kids in schools are, sorted into whatever societal role they're going to end up fulfilling, and it's presented to them in this kind of like playtime kind of way, like, let's dress up as the janitor. And my biggest laugh, just to jump way ahead because I don't know when we'd talk about this otherwise, but my biggest laugh of the episode
Janitor kid.
is the janitor kid at the end who dumps out Ted's wastebasket and then looks at him dead in the eyes and says, I'm learning a life skill. It's like, yeah, that's what school can do. Like when school is at its most nefarious in a capitalist society, school is about like, yeah, let's teach you the life skills of time management and, being on
How to work
time
for a
to
manager.
things, and how to work for a manager and not get in trouble, and all that stuff.
Yeah, sometimes it's background criticism, and sometimes it's the janitor coming up with like that. He might as well have been like, it's a living, and that would have been equally funny.
Right.
But like when Ted and Rose are walking out, the laugh I got was they walk by a bunch of like junior scientists, which is like cute. You're like, oh, they're working on science. But then just to like the kicker is there's a girl inside of the daycare cleaning the window of the daycare. Like,
yeah.
This is her job now, is that we just have to do our own work here. Yeah, I actually, you made a really good point. Like, this is their way to do a, preschool plot or a preschool set in an office environment. And my workplace, actually, this is the first place I've worked at that has a daycare, which I know mostly because, there's like I work with a lot of like badging and access in my job, and there's a lot of specific access that allows people to interact with children or not. So like all of those rooms are very, very much like secured. You can't get in unless you have really special permission. But I know the person who runs the daycare, and real talk, she does have kind of a similar vibe to the woman that talks to Ted, where she's like, I just love the kids. They're so nice and fun, and they're always learning things. And I'm like, I don't know what you guys do up there because I'm not allowed up there, or what you got, like what work is being done. But I really hope that they're not teaching them like these marketable life skills like this, and that they're learning something more fun. I don't know. But similar to how we're like seeing different pockets of office environment. It was just cool to be like, oh, and daycares exist too. That's a really like, especially now in the during this pandemic, one of the biggest reasons that people aren't going back to their offices is because they don't have daycares open yet. So if you don't have that, then if you're a parent, it's like, well, too bad. You can't have a babysitter over because a lot of them aren't going to come. So
yeah.
Interesting angle.
I think something just on that note that we didn't mention in the first episode of Better Off Chats, but that was kind of an animating force behind us wanting to pick Better Off Ted in the first place is, and if people aren't crazy about us mentioning the pandemic, I apologize for that, but like, I'm personally interested in Better Off Ted being a show that is satirizing workplace and corporate culture and looking at that during the coronavirus moment when like the workplace has been totally thrown into flux and we can really look at it from like an outside perspective.
Totally.
And use Better Off Ted, which is trying to also have an outside perspective to kind of think more deeply about just how fucked up office and corporate culture is. And that, that's one of those parts of it, right? That like, when you think about it, it kind of doesn't make that much sense that people have to choose between raising their children and going to work, because like people being with their children would make society better,
I mean, Ted opens in that opening monologue. He also says like, I usually like to keep work and home separate, but I can't today.
Yeah.
And that's like what the quote we found from Fresco on the Wikipedia page is saying is like, this show in a lot of ways is about how like some people really want to keep that separate, and they want to be able to like do that old fashioned, and it is very much like a 20th century idea of going to the office, having your office friends and office buddies, and you wear your suit and tie, and then you go home, and then you get to put your sweatpants on, and now you're a dad again, and like separating those. But in reality, you're still the dad. Like anything, your kid exists when you're at work.
Yeah.
So there's that difficulty there, and I think that the episode does handle that really well. Like what happens when your daughter sees what work is like for you and how evil it is, and how destructive it can be for someone.
Yeah, and it I think overall what the episode does is it's about when the family sphere and the work sphere combine and how that kind of fucks with both of them, right?
Yeah.
Or messes with both. I don't know if we're trying not to curse, so I apologize. I've been cursing a lot. It messes with both of them. Both in the Rose and Veronica plot, and then in the Phil and Lem plot, and kind of in the Ted and Linda plot too, which are the three sort of avenues we're going to discuss. All of them are affected by that collision of work and home.
Exactly. Yeah.
Where do you want to start? I kind of like starting with like the one that we like the least. That feels like our normal pattern.
Which would be in this case Ted and Linda, it sounds like.
Yeah. So
sure.
Basically, Ted like drops off Rose with Linda to go talk to Phil and Lem, I think, or something. I don't remember why he does. But then he comes back, and Linda and Rose are hanging out. It's really cute. And, Rose is like, look, I drew this thing. And it's all the three of them holding hands, which is, awkward moment machines, Linda says. Also, the great joke that I missed the first watch and that you reminded me of when I went for my second watch, which is when Ted shows up and Rose says, hi, Daddy. And then Linda says, hi, Daddy. And then she's like, I'm never going to call you that again.
So good.
That was pretty funny. But then basically the way the plot boils down is Linda's like, oh, my ex-boyfriend is going to be here. Ted is upset about that. But Linda's kind of like, hey, you got to, shit or get off the pot, basically. Like, I just swore again. You have to like do something or I'm going to go on and live my life. So figure it out, buddy. And then this episode really for Ted is about figuring out like, okay, I have my one office affair, but can I have a second one? My fake rule is so stupid and fake.
Especially because if he were to commit to this one and make it something serious, then Rose would have a mother figure. But like his biggest worry here is basically, I don't want her to have a woman in her life, a mother figure, leave again.
Yeah, he like realizes that worry later because his initial worry is like, I don't want to seem like I sleep around with everybody, which is silly.
Yeah.
And then, when he ultimately makes the decision, you know what? That's silly. I'm going to try to be with Linda. Then Linda's talking about, like, I hate this job. I want to run away to my mom's boat cabin in Oregon. Doesn't it look pretty? And then, like you're saying, he's like, oof. Oh, okay. I don't want another woman to leave us, which is not fair to Linda, Ted.
Yes, definitely.
She wouldn't just like say, screw this guy and his daughter, I'm going to run away to Oregon. Like, she just hates her job and wants to fantasize about not having to go to her job.
Just
So,
yeah, to tie it back to the like workplace experience, I think it's extremely common, especially in the American work environment, to want what Linda's talking about here, to like go to your cabin or go to like your beach bungalow and or like live in the mountains, right? And just like, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. Usually, people don't go with that. Like, you hear rare cases of like my friend when he went to Hawaii, did like a zip lining course, and the instructor said that he worked in like corporate America for like years, and then visited Hawaii and never came back, and that's how he became a zip line instructor. It's like that exists, but the majority of people are saying that to kind of vent their frustration with feeling unfulfilled. So if you give them something to make them feel fulfilled and like their life has a purpose, for example, having a serious committed relationship with a successful, handsome gentleman and his like wonderful daughter, that's something to help Linda feel really fulfilled. She wants to write children's books. She cares about kids.
Right. That's
like,
a good point.
You're seeing the writing on the wall that Linda would actually be great for Rose and for Ted, but you know, she is worried because like he seems to not understand her desire for freedom yet. And it's about him like kind of cracking open that egg in his head, so to speak, of like, oh, you can want to leave and also be a successful business person. I think that's like where the arc could be interesting.
Yeah. And I think what also is kind of the disconnect for Ted right now is he's projecting this fear that he has about being left again.
Yeah.
Himself onto his daughter. And he's like, oh, I don't want my daughter to be left again. But like Rose is, I mean, obviously it is really upsetting when your mom leaves, but also she's doing fine, you know, as fine as she can be doing. She's a smart, clever, confident young girl. And so like, I think if he sort of trusted in his daughter's maturity a little bit more, and was more self-reflective, he would see like, oh, I'm worried about Linda leaving me, and not just about her leaving my daughter. But as it is, you know, it's a good enough reason to put a pause on the Ted and Linda thing, because I don't know, it's better than like something else they could have done. I can't even think of an alternative way to kind of stretch out the will they won't they, but I'm not mad at this. I just think it's one of those things where you look at the TV and you're like, just talk to each other. you know, like so many problems.
I think that
sitcoms and stuff.
The first example that comes to my mind, just because it's current for us, is Scrubs, because we're both watching along with the Fake Doctors Real Friends podcast. And like the JD and Elliot plot is technically like half a season's worth of Will They Won't They stretched out over almost a decade. Because,
yes, that's true.
And the way that they do that is they just you have two revolving doors of JD's hot girlfriends and Elliot's hot boyfriends that they both keep going through until they're like, wait, should we? No, new boyfriend, new girlfriend, new boyfriend, new girlfriend. Oh wait, maybe we should. And then they finally do.
Right.
I think you could have done that with Better Off Ted if the show had gone on longer, but like the pressure of having to raise the child is what puts the sort of like anxiety in Ted's mind. It's not just that he's a young guy and he wants to be in love. Like, I don't think he feels that way. The main reason he wants a mother figure is for Rose.
Yes, I think that's fair. Yeah, that's true.
So I think this plot is okay, but mostly because the actress playing Linda is just so charming. Like when she drops that like I'm great at metaphors and or I'm bad at metaphors but great at sex line, it's just like very something you would accidentally say in like an office and be like, oh, that was dumb. I'm sorry I said that. Or the like daddy thing is like a classic goof moment. She's just really, she feels like the most real person in a world of fake people, you know?
She does a great job of, it's funny that you mention Scrubs and Elliot in Scrubs, because I feel like Elliot kind of has like similar lines written for her that Linda does, where it's sort of like I'm rambling, and then I say something that's like really funny and sort of a button on this long ramble that I just did.
Yeah. Yep.
But the way that Sarah Chalk delivers it in Scrubs is she's very like blah, 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 right? Like it's sort of you get the cadence I'm going for, right?
Yes.
But it's this very sort of, theatrical, exaggerated thing, which I think is a very fun character in Scrubs, which is, a show that is whimsical in a different way from Better Off Ted. But I think that Andrea Anders does a fantastic job of doing similar lines, but in a much more grounded way. So she can still be this like funny character, but she's not like a cartoon, which is how, again, not in a bad way, but that's sometimes how like Sarah Chalk's performance in Scrubs pans out, is that it can be cartoonish because a lot of that show has fun being cartoonish,
broad, and just like this is omni-relatable because it's just these are how people can act. I wonder too then if like Ted sees relationships like Phil and Lem's and sees this like found family like best friendship / romance, and also seeks something of that with like Linda, almost, where he sees these two who like are trying to decide in this episode, for example, like which one of us is the boss, right? Because what was the context for that plot line starting?
So the inception of that plot is that Ted is taking Rose around the office, and he takes her to a meeting about like the latest weapon system or whatever. And it's this whole fun gag about how they have to call the weapon system a bunny because she's in the room and they can't talk about what it really does. So Phil's saying stuff like, if we drop the bunny from an airplane, then everyone in a 40-mile radius will be so severely snuggled that they'll be hospitalized with first-degree burns or something like that.
He's like, hospitalized? He's like, yeah, from snuggles.
Yeah. And then Ted caps it off with like, and for those of you who don't understand what's going on, we'll have this meeting again tomorrow.
Ugh, speaking of things that I've heard in my actual workplace.
Yeah. And then Rose kind of comments when Phil and Lem are squabbling over the grabbing extra sandwiches, which we talked about last week a little bit, with like grabbing extra food when there's food.
Right.
Yeah, but when they are squabbling over whether Phil should take an extra sandwich or something, Rose says, "So is Lem your boss now?" And then it tips off this whole thing between them for the rest of the episode, where they're trading back and forth like who's in charge, because each of them wants to be the boss, or at least each of them doesn't want to have the other one be their boss. I don't think either of them really wants to be the boss necessarily. They just don't want to be bossed around by the other guy.
Who's the top and who's the bottom in this relationship, Magellan? Just answer it for the fans.
I think it's, what's the word for when you kind of trade back and forth?
Switch.
Yeah.
I think they're both switches. That's fair. And I think accurate. Because even in my notes, I was like writing it back and forth. Like, wait, no, is it them?
They kind of write it in alternating ways. Because the way that they write it at the beginning of this episode is that Lem is more assertive, and he's like, come on, don't take that sandwich. But then in the next episode, Phil's the one who's telling Lem, like, come on, you're not going to actually confront her about this.
Yeah, assert yourself more.
So I feel like they're both like pretty similar in status, and then it just sort of varies situation to situation who kind of asserts themselves versus not.
It's a versatile relationship, and I like that about it a lot, that they can both kind of slip in and out of those different roles and support each other in different ways. And literally support each other, because the like big quote unquote dramatic event of this episode is there's these HAZMAT drills that keep happening, and they're not sure why they keep happening. But when they do, an alarm goes off and everybody gets sealed into their office, and they have to find the nearest hazmat suit, put it on until the alarms go off. And, Ted and Linda have their whole thing where they're in their suits, and then they decide now is the time they want to
make out. Yeah.
To make out. And they successfully kiss through plexiglass. And then it's uncomfortable.
Do these great like first person shots of each of their faces as they go in for the kiss. I think that whole scene is actually really well directed and then the music swells as they start to like squeakily make out in the suits and stuff.
Well,
It's
the
pretty
best
funny.
part too is when Ted is like, "It's probably fake anyways," and he takes his helmet off, and then Linda's like,
Yeah.
"Well, now I don't want to do it because now I feel pressured to do it." And he's like, "No, you don't have to." Okay, I'm
Yeah.
putting mine on now. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I made this weird.
yeah.
So the guy who ended up doing it, I forget his name. But this will eventually loop us back to the best plot of the episode. Is like, well, I was fired because I was using the hazmat or the sort of alarm to take an extra long break, and then your daughter fired me.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, that's awkward.
Yeah.
But we see Phil and Lem later, and the hazmat suit. There was supposed to be one for each of them. But the second one was like behind glass somewhere. So when we cut back to them, they're in the same hazmat suit. They
Yeah,
each have an
and
arm and a leg in it. It's an adorable.
they've decided to not fight anymore and be in
Yeah.
the same suit. Great moment of physical comedy when the camera hangs on them before it goes to commercial break, and like they both in unison scratch Phil's face and then adjust Lem's glasses with both of their hands together.
Oh, holy crap! Good work.
That was very, very funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they use the hazmat suits really well, just to be like, you can do a lot with this. I think obviously, if you want to again be annoying with relating this to our current world, the like, oh, we can't touch thing is
Yeah.
a bit of a mood, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean the Ted Linda moment had sort of vibe of like, oh, people who want to be together in quarantine, but there's like problems with that.
Yeah, I don't need a whole season of what was that show called? Love in the Time of Corona.
Yeah.
No thanks, no thanks. I'd decline it. Thank you though.
Yeah.
Oh, the guy's name was Al. That's why I remembered it because I was like, oh, Al. Is the one who set off the false alarm because he needed more
Yeah.
break time, which again, praxis.
Right.
setting off the fire alarm to miss a math quiz, bad. You should take your math quiz. Setting off the fire alarm for an extra 20 minutes break, genius. Love it. Respect that.
Yep.
Yeah. So to really get to it, the agent of chaos that's setting off all these different plot lines is Rose, who is being groomed in this episode by Veronica in what can only be described in a masterclass of, I don't know, just
being Portia de Rossi.
Yeah, extremely. Just like Veronica as a character has like cemented so quickly. She's solidified like what she wants to be, what her wants and needs are. Incredible work from de Rossi, and I think the girl who plays Rose like does so good at like keeping up with her. Even though this is like an actual child playing this character, they managed to make her not too precocious. Like she doesn't talk half the time, but she just reacts really well.
Yeah, you can kind of tell that. I mean, maybe she's memorizing her lines, but it really seems like because every one of her lines is delivered in like a fresh shot.
Yeah,
they like cut to her. She says a line, then they cut. It sort of feels like they were like, okay, now say this, and then she
Here's
just
your line.
says it, and then Portia de Rossi like does a really good job of sort of making it feel like they're having a dialogue. Not to say that the girl is doing a bad job, but she's like a child actor, right? So she's not gonna do a stunning job, but she's adorable and she delivers her lines well enough. And then this whole plot line is just so entertaining. And I think what I appreciate about it is so the way it's set up. Ted is like, hey, Veronica says, okay, you need to go talk to Phil and Lem. Ted says, I can't. I need to watch Rose. And then Veronica says, I can wash Rose.
I said watch her, not wash her. Even easier.
Yeah.
The fact that you thought I was going to go wash Rose right now.
So funny. I think that was my second favorite joke in the episode. And then she's like, come on, I know about children. And he's like, well, the fact that you thought that I said I was going to wash Rose. And then he's like, it seems like you don't know anything about kids. And she's like, well, I know they have to be clean.
They need cleaning. Yeah. Just effortless. She takes the lob and just hits it out of the park with every line.
It's really stunning how Veronica just like refuses to yield status in any situation whatsoever. Like she's made a complete fool of herself and she does not bat an eye and maintains complete composure and control of the situation. It's really funny.
Because she can be neurotic and also stunningly confident here, right? Because even when she's like, oh, you have such nice, like, she's so weird. She's like, you have such nice skin, Rose. I wish I could just peel it off and put it on myself. But then she's like, no, you would grow it back. You would grow newer, better skin on yourself. Like, what the fudge? What are you saying?
So that whole scene, it sets it up to be like, oh, Veronica's bad with kids. Oh, she's going to do a terrible job. And what I really like about how this plot does things is it doesn't do this sort of cheesy sitcom thing of like, oh no, Veronica lost her, or oh god, she's feeding Rose like the bad food or doing a horrible job, or there's no disaster or goofiness here. Both Rose and Veronica are having the time of their lives. They both are really happy. And then the tension of the plot comes from the fact that you, the viewer, are like, oh God, she's life lessons.
Her to be a manager.
Yeah. The life lessons that she's imparting to Rose are horrible. This is really bad. This is how people like Veronica are created.
Yeah.
But there's no bitterness in the plot. Right. Even as they're like firing people or whatever, it's treated as just this like kind of delightful, fun, like we're having a great day together, aren't we? Sort of thing. So I really love the way that plot struck that tone.
It's specifically the way that Veronica, and she does this exact same thing in the second episode, where she like uses her role as a female CEO or whatever to like still manipulate her image and be like, I'm a woman in a man's world. And so she knows that language and uses it with Rose. And then Ted later is like, Rose, what's Veronica teaching you? She's like, I'm learning how to be a woman in a man's world. And it's like, no, yeah, I mean, that's not a bad thing.
In a way, yeah, but yeah.
Like, it's exemplified by her being like, Veronica just pulls the first book off of her shelf, and it's freaking The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And she's like, take this, Rose, you gotta read it. And she's like, I don't want to read this. And she's like, your enemies are reading. The competition is reading it, so you're gonna fall behind.
Yeah.
Exactly what you were saying, where it's like this is how Veronica gets made, as you get used to that from a very young age.
And I think that this, just to sort of, speak about this show in terms of like improv terminology for a second, and specifically UCB improv terminology, and thinking about like game. Yeah. This is such a great game for a plot where it's like,
Can you explain what game is for the people, by the way?
So game is basically like, I mean, it's defined differently in different contexts, and I might not be defining it or using it exactly how people have heard it before. But game is essentially like the pattern that recurs and that you build upon and riff on to create the sort of main jokes of the sketch or the scene or whatever. Mm-hmm. And so this game of like, what does it do when you're doing normal corporate lady things, but there's a kid in the room, is really fun, because the guy comes in and then he's nice to her, and then the thing where the guy's being fired, and then it's like, now remember there's a kid here, and he's like, oh, I'm sorry. That's just
she wields Rose like a knife or like a shield almost.
Yeah.
And she's like, I can actually be more evil now that I have a child in front of me. That's the true evil of corporations.
Yeah, and she can do this thing of like, it's so great when the guy comes in to yell at her and she's like, oh yes, she's a child and she hates yelling, and that's all that you need to know. Come here, Rose, let me see if you're okay. And then
she, like a human who's never touched another human. She like hugs her.
Yeah.
Like I think this is what hugging is.
And then she like holds Rose in front of her, like, go ahead, continue. Yeah, it's so, I mean, we're just kind of saying all the things that are funny about it, but like,
all of it.
The writing is fantastic, and then Portia de Rossi makes it so funny. I think it's like the funniest plot that's happened in the show so far is this whole Veronica Rose thing.
I agree. I mean, so one, that scene where she tries to hold Rose and doesn't know how to hold a child, specifically recalls to me when I first held my cousin's daughter when she was like less than a year old, and I like had literally never held a newborn before. And I like, they still reference this to me all the time. I held it like full arm's length, I held her like full arm's length away from me and just like held her out, and she just starts crying. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And they're like, she's not an object. You need to like cradle a child. That's how people work.
Yeah.
Just like she does not see Rose as a person. But the other hysterical thing is that Rose develops the mannerisms of Veronica slowly and subtly throughout the episode.
Mhm.
So, the second time that they have a firing meeting, she has her legs crossed like Veronica does, and for such a young child to like fully cross her legs, I'm like, holy crap, that's a stunt a bit. And then, the ultimate stinger of it being that when Ted comes to pick her up at the end of the day, she has Veronica's like hyper tied back hair, and Rose is like, it hurts a lot, and she's like, you'll get used to it after a couple years.
Yeah. And Jay Harrington, when he comes in as Ted into that scene, such a good, I mean, I think he and Andrea Anders both are fantastic at playing these very like subdued but still obviously funny performances, because his Ted is like, he's an affable guy. He never does anything that's too exaggerated or goofy, but he plays his reactions so well when he comes into the room and sees his daughter becoming Veronica right in front of his eyes, and his eyebrows sort of jump like, oh no, but then he immediately has to put a lid on it, because like he can't yell at his boss, he can't yell at his daughter, he can't go off the edge or whatever. He has to just be totally calm. So I think it's worth going back to that scene and rewatching the split second where he walks in and reacts, and really watching his reaction.
His eyebrows are already up, and then they soar like a couple more inches higher, and they stay up.
It's this beautiful, subtle little reactive move that I think is such a great moment. And like that, that tells you everything you need to know about why this guy is perfect for playing Ted, I think.
Yeah.
That, and he just like walks in a great way. I kind of was thinking that walking while talking into camera must have been some aspect of the screening or auditioning process, because his walk is so right,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. He walked with a confidence, but also like it's a reactive walk. So like if something's happening in front of him, he's like, "Ooh, I'm slowing down." Okay, he's got that like very in control of how he carries himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, that stuff is all. It's just, we could we're gonna do like favorite quotes at the end of this segment, but all of the Veronica Rose stuff was truly hysterical, and getting to watch Ted at the end pick her up and like realize everything about the episode and sum it up was nice too, because he's kind of doing the Scrubs thing, but it's much funnier. Like they talk on the Scrubs podcast about like, oh, none of the Scrubs like monologues make sense outside of context, because a lot of them are like, at the end of the day, I learned that friendship is what you make of it, and what you make of it is day to day.
Right. And you see the clips of characters in the episode, and that's what makes it make sense. Yeah.
So if you just take the audio of it, you're like, this isn't a lesson of anything. But at the very least, Ted is like, I learned that family matters, and like sometimes you have to make tough choices for your family, and the one office of hair rule is stupid. Like just it's much more clean and like concise.
Yeah, and it reminds me, we're going to talk about this, that one of the writers on the next episode wrote for Malcolm in the Middle, but it kind of has like a Malcolm in the Middle inspired feel, where, because Malcolm does that too, where he talks into camera and like wraps it all up, but in a kind of like, I'm a teenager, so I don't totally get what's happening way. I just think that I've learned a lesson.
Right.
And Ted is kind of a similar character, where he's sort of learned a lesson, but also he's like kind of a vapid guy, so he hasn't fully learned anything. But
do you want to hit me with some of your favorite quotes from this episode?
I wanted to actually talk, the last thing I wanted to talk about is the Viridian Dynamics commercial in the middle of the episode. This one was about family, and so we were talking about how like this episode is kind of about what happens when home and work, those spheres collide, and like Rose messed up the Ted and Linda plot, and she messed up the Phil and Lem plot, but also work kind of like messed her up and started to turn her into a work person, and certainly it's doing that to all those poor kids in the daycare. And so then the Viridian Dynamics commercial, I think, does a really great job of skewering the thing that I hate the most about work culture, which is like workplaces saying, "Oh, we're a family here. That's what we are. We're a family." And like I'm a high school teacher, and the school that I work at does that too. Yeah. It's kind of different in schools, I guess, because you have to actually give a shit about, you have to actually care about your students and take care of them as if they're your family, to be a good teacher, but also it's still
There's a reason that you call them your kids when I ask you about your students. You say, my kids are this, 'cause-
right. But then also I do end up really resenting the sort of undercurrent of that, which is like, come on, we're your family. Like, you can do a little more work. You can stay up late. You can
Do it for us. Do it for the group.
You can grade on the weekend. Like, it's for your family.
Exactly. It's so often the way, not even just in
Yeah.
teaching, but in like any like development and stuff like that, any environment like this. It's the excuse to get people to like work more than their job description asks of them. That's how workplace
Right.
abuse starts. Exactly.
Right. And then make you feel bad when you try to assert like these are the boundaries, right? Because there's a sort of bad way to separate work from home that this show is trying to address, where like if you leave your morals at home and let your daughter go to school while you go make like the huge weapons of
Doomsday,
mass
yeah,
destruction or whatever,
Mhm.
that's bad. But there's a good way to separate work from home where it's like you need to keep the sort of integrity of your life intact and not have it be destroyed by work, because the commercial goes into like, we're a family here, like that's what we do. And my favorite quote from it is, we love our family, which is why we work nights, weekends, and major holidays, because that's when families should be together. That was
Literally
so good.
Literally have worked through major holidays and like wept at
Yeah.
like texts from family being like, wish you were here. I don't want to talk about it, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's workplace abuse at its core. Love it. And by love it, I mean want to destroy it. Fundamentally.
So it was really cathartic just for that to be the Viridian Dynamics commercial in this episode, because
Definitely.
that stuff drives me crazy.
I mean, hell, with everybody trying to find remote work now, if you're unemployed, that's like the best thing for you to look at for right now for a lot of people. So much remote work is like job descriptions now are like, it's just like you're gonna have like a big friendly group chat. We have a Slack chat. Like I sent you a job description. Someone had messaged me recently, being like, check this shit out, and it was like the most disgusting corporate jumble nonsense of buzzwords. Like, we're gonna send each other memes just like all your friends do, and it's like, that's what my friends are for. That's not what my freaking job is for. And the job posting I'm talking about like never describes what the job is. It's just like it's just a culture of like friends hanging out. We have like weekends and we love when you take vacation. But it's like, no, what is the job? I need to know what the job is. Paying my health insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, jobs are hell. Speaking of better titles for Better Off Ted, jobs are hell. Yeah, I did and I thought that Viridian Dynamics ad really got it. The one that got me was we're not wasting our time jumping through piles of leaves.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you have any fun quotes from this episode that you wanted to drop?
I really love the gag when Veronica meets Rose and she's like, well, you're always welcome here, daughter of Ted. And then he's like, oh, her name is Rose. And then
I know everyone's name.
To Rose, she's like, oh, your father, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, his name is Ted. And then, yeah, she says, I know everyone's name. I thought that was really funny. I think that's the only one. Oh, and then the other one that I wrote down that I haven't said yet is when Linda's telling Ted about her ex-boyfriend, and he's like, I didn't know you had an ex-boyfriend. And she says, I have tons of ex-boyfriends, Ted. Well, not tons. Many. A few. Just the right amount. That was really clever, too.
Again, it's that delivery. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much the whole first conversation between Rose and Veronica I had written down, like the handing her the Art of War and being like, trust me, your enemies are reading it, was excellent. It starts with her saying like, Rose, explain to me the joke about the monkey again. And she's like, it wasn't funny or whatever. And then she's like, no, it was funny. You didn't get it. It was funny.
Oh yeah. It's like, you have to know what stock options are. And then she's like, you explained it. I still don't think it's
you explained it. That's me trying to like get a person to laugh at a YouTube video
Yeah.
I'm showing them. And they're like,
Yeah.
no, I don't. It's not funny.
Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. And then just the briefly like the Phil and Lem like timing each other stuff I thought was cute.
Yeah.
Not much to it beyond that though. But John, before our break, we actually received an email while recording part 1. Would you like
we did.
to discuss and read this first email?
Let's do it.
Sweet. This email comes in from friend of the podcast and regular contributor Nick. Do you want to go back and forth reading this, or should I read this, Mitch?
You can read it. Go for it.
Awesome. Hey guys, I agree 100% that the reason I didn't watch the show when it was first on was the horrible title. Given how clever the writing is, I have to wonder if it was a network mandate to use this title. But what would you guys suggest differently, having now watched a few episodes? So we'll tackle that in a sec. But he continues, watching the show and the clever writing and the character of Phil all reminded me of Santa Clarita Diet, which is a show on Netflix that had the same actor who played Phil as a recurring character. And it turned out that Victor Fresco is the creator of both shows. So that makes sense.
Oh, he made Santa Clarita Diet?
Yes.
I've been curious about that show.
Me too. I've heard pretty good things. And I like Timothy Oliphant a lot. Is he on that? I think.
I don't know.
Sadly, that show was canceled, the cliffhanger, and I'm still mad at Netflix for it. So,
Oh,
the tragedy.
really?
Yeah. I
Why
think
would
it went
Netflix-
longer, though.
Why would Netflix do that to one of its
Well,
own
was it-
shows? That
Was
seems
it
weird.
initially? I think it was initially a Netflix original.
I thought it was a
yeah.
Netflix original.
Yeah, Timothy Oliphant and Drew Barrymore. 30 episodes. Damn, that is shorter than I thought, huh? Interesting. Yeah, but the
Yeah.
premise of that one seemed really cool. In case you guys were not aware, they did in fact grow fake beef meat in a lab funded by one of the Google guys back in 2014. The same issues did occur, which is that it's basically meat only with zero fat, so it tastes very, very dry, and it's also very expensive per pound or kilogram.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he linked us the Frankenburger, which I'm going to look into later. That sounds awful. Yeah, that's the problem with all the technology in this show is it's all real. But we talked about like Beyond Meat and stuff. Like this has existed. This is not like creepy or weird.
Yeah, it certainly maybe in 2009 felt more outlandish and
Yeah,
and
exactly.
new and creepy. Yeah.
And then responding to the email, he says seconded or maybe third watching or piloting the TV show Reaper, which Ryan recommended us. Ray Wise was born to play the devil with that grindy eyebrows combination. Yeah, definitely going to check out, or at least look into Reaper, because I remember hearing good things a while ago. And then finally, he says, we got a summer worth of history lessons from Magellan, but now it's time to shine for Alan to teach the world about the corporate workplace. Fuck. I am happy that I get to have an expertise, even if it is something that I am in not entirely because I like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I find it fascinating, you know? Just because something isn't good doesn't mean it isn't interesting. But thank you, Nick, for the email. In terms of what we would name Better Off Ted, if we didn't call it Better Off Ted, I've been thinking about this like every night since we started watching it. I feel like it has to be a single word, like blanked, patented, something like that. Do you have any vague ideas?
I've been thinking about the title, and I'm coming around to. It has like a few layers of meaning that I wasn't appreciating before. Like it's not just like it rhymes with Better Off Dead, but it's sort of like there's this duality of both you're going to be better off if you act like Ted, and also Ted is a person who's better off like financially, and also like Ted is dead inside. There's like ways you can make it. You can go literature class on it and make it.
For sure.
Make it cool. But it just isn't that great of a name. I don't know. I don't know what you would do to fix it. You could say like, you could just make it kind of generic, like The Office or something.
Yeah.
And say like, what's the department they're in? Like product management,
research and development, I thought.
Yeah, you could call it research and development.
Yeah.
You could call it.
Viridian Dynamics is too broad. It's tough. I mean, I think also like Fresco and Company like aren't amazing at selling their shows with a title. It's really hard, to be fair. I'm not like saying I could do it better because we're struggling right now, but like Santa Clarita Diet is another one where I'm like, I have no idea what that show is from the title. It doesn't sell me on anything. Other than the vibe of like diet culture, I guess. But that's not what the show is about either. So yeah, Better Off Ted. It's an okay show. It definitely does, like Nick is saying, feel like a network mandated name though. Where like they might have had other names and then they were like, no, you need something that like has people. Networks love it when the main character's name is in the title, especially when it's a single syllable like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be fine, but there's just nothing. Like, I think the fact that there's something called Better Off Dead and then
Yeah,
this is
separate,
Better Off
well-known
Ted,
TV show called
it's
Better
like,
Off Dead.
That makes it kind of a strange choice.
Exactly, I agree.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll keep that in the pocket, and if we come up with a good name, we'll like put it in the pocket. We'll say it on the pod at some point. No promises. But I will promise you this, dear listener. We'll be right back after this brief musical break to discuss racial sensitivity.
Viridian Dynamics. Diversity. Just the thought of it makes these white people smile. We believe everyone works best when they work together, even if they're just standing around. Just like we enjoy varieties of foods, we enjoy varieties of people, even though we can't eat them. At Viridian Dynamics, we're committed to a multi-ethnic workplace. You can shake on it. Viridian Dynamics. Diversity. Good for us.
Welcome back to Better Off Chats. The second episode we watched this week was Season 1, Episode 4 of Better Off Ted, entitled Racial Sensitivity. It was written by Victor Fresco and Michael Glauberman, directed by Michael Fresco, originally aired April 8th, 2009. And Alan, what happened in Racial Sensitivity?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Magellan. Thanks for asking. Hey guys, in Racial Sensitivity, Viridian comes up with an extremely insensitive solution to a problem with its motion sensors that do not detect black people. And Ted finds out that Linda now has a boyfriend who's extremely likable.
Oh my god.
I love when we wrote these
the
summaries.
stark contrast between the importance of those two plots.
It's awesome, isn't it?
That's very funny.
Yeah. So, we've talked before about how like occasionally Better Off Ted hits too close to home, too close to reality. I could literally pull up an article right now about how like Face ID is racist, Zoom face detection is racist. This is how the world is today. There's nothing fantasy or sci-fi about this episode anymore.
Yeah.
It is still quite funny. And I applaud Better Off Ted for attempting to swing for the fences with the racial discussion. How do you think it fared?
I mean, I appreciate that they, like you said, that they went for it and that they addressed it, and that overall I think the episode holds up in the way that you're describing, where like this is now, it's no longer satirical. Maybe at the time in 2009, like there were some early rumblings of this sort of thing going on, and so Better Off Ted jumped on it, and was being kind of imaginative about like what would happen if this whatever, but it sort of ages in the way that a good Simpsons plot ages, where it's like, okay, this just became real life, so you did a good job. I think as I was watching this one and the first one to a certain extent, I actually forgot to talk about this in the first one, so I'm going to kind of go back to the first one a little bit, but I was just thinking about like how this show is from an era of comedy, like Bush era and just after Bush era comedy, where the tone of satire was like the sort of Daily Show tone of like, well, it's fucked up, but pretty funny, right? And nowadays, like, that doesn't really fly anymore. That's not the tone. You can't really say like, well, pretty fucked up, but
oh well, what can you do?
Man.
Haha.
Anyway, let's go back to our lives. And like in the first one, there's a lot of that stuff about like how they're building this deadly weapon, and the joke is, but we can't talk about how it's a weapon because there's a kid in the room.
Bunny.
And you're supposed to love all these characters and not be too bothered by that, but that's like actually a really horrible thing, this sort of military industrial complex thing. And I watched the first episode of Andy Richter Controls the Universe, which is Victor Fresco's show before this, which I'll watch more of and maybe talk more about because it's really interesting to compare. But there's a plot in that first episode where like Andy Richter's character also works at this big corporation, and his job is that he writes user manuals for like weapons systems.
Oh boy.
And it's just kind of like a, like this is the fake job that we made up for our guy and it doesn't actually matter. But then there's this sort of joke about how he like changes one of the blueprints, and then they're thinking about what would happen if the weapon system didn't work and blew up the wrong way or something. And it's just like this sort of casual attitude towards these big problems of like American imperialism and again the military industrial complex are weird. And so this episode kind of strikes that same tone with systemic racism, where literally I think the only character to say systemic racism is Veronica, when she's like, anyway, let's talk about the problems of systemic racism.
It's the gag.
And it's the joke, yeah. And like they make good points, but also they do it in a sort of like the gloves are on, and this is like, you know, I don't know. Like it's a tough thing to hit with satire because you want it to be funny, but then if it's too funny, then now it's safe, you know?
Right.
So I was really entertained and I thought it was really funny. And then I'm just thinking about it in the context of like, you know, but does it fully work as like this work of satire? Can satire work, you know? I don't know. Because it kind of also got me, I know I'm saying a lot of stuff, so this is the last thing I'll say, but
yeah,
it got me thinking about Sorry to Bother You.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good movie.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen it, by the way, gotta go watch that.
Which, like, if you're looking for a movie that tackles this thing of, like, race in the workplace, Sorry to Bother You is the movie to watch.
Oh, yeah.
And Sorry
the
to Bother
white people
You...
voice. Even just
Sorry
that
to
concept.
Right. And Sorry to Bother You makes you really uncomfortable, right? Like, it gets kind of gross and very, very unnerving. And I kind of think that's the only way to really make a point about stuff like this, is to do it in the context of a movie or a show that makes you really, really uncomfortable. Because it's very easy to watch this episode and just be comfortable watching it.
Yeah, I mean, the most like I felt that this episode hit its mark was when you have Lem and all of the other black male employees entirely going up to Veronica and going in the elevator and talking about how like, oh, someone was in the elevator with us and he got out, and then he's like, oh, you're in an elevator full of black guys and you're the only white person, you're going to get out on the first chance you can. Like the show knows, you know, that like, hey, we have this perception of the people around us that is unintentional but very harmful, and the people who have that unfairness perpetrated against them are also very intimately aware of it. Even Lem, who like his race doesn't come into question that often. It's not like a plot point ever, but now it entirely is, and that's what defines that. I think too, just to go briefly back to what you're talking about with like how this relates and how this kind of dates itself today, is that in 2009, the idea of a surveillance state and the idea of specifically a racist surveillance state was like believable but cute, and we've zoomed so far past that into like literally not conspiracy theory nonsense. If you are filming people at a Black Lives Matter protest and the algorithm detects, and these are not my words, quote unquote, African American features, you are more likely to bring police presence to your location, because that's how these algorithms are not just colorist, but they are explicitly racist. And it is extremely fucked up, and it is super real. So I applaud this episode for like hitting the 101 of that, of like, sometimes your phone doesn't unlock because it doesn't know how to register dark skin, or like it's funny now that like Zoom, you know, there was a tweet recently going viral about how like Zoom can't make a virtual background if you have black skin, but like also that specific like gag in that technology is being used to perpetuate a racist surveillance state, police state.
Very true.
And it's just something we have to like come to terms with and fight against, but you know, they're going for it.
Yeah.
It's still a funny episode of television.
I think the other thing that I just thought of that's important to acknowledge is like what you were saying about Lem made me think of this, that like the episode isn't about Lem's experience as a black man at Viridian Dynamics, really, because there's nothing about like the employees are paid differently or treated differently by management or microaggressions or whatever, any of that stuff, or hiring practices. Like there's none of that. the villain or the racism of the episode is entirely in the technology and in the indifference of like the board, but it's not actually examining like the experience of the African American employees at the company, right?
This is a plot written by white men, to be fair.
Yeah, right. So that I think that's, and you could argue that like, but the motion sensor thing only seeing white people is a stand-in for the way that white versus black people are treated in work environments. And so you don't have to do this literal story because you're doing this like satirical stand-in for how different groups are discriminated against. And I could see that argument, but again, it ends up making it feel like a very safe thing to be like, okay, and we fixed the problem and put the old sensors back in, and now we're not racist anymore. Let's go to episode 5. You know?
Yeah, I think, there's a reason. This is one of the most famous episodes of the show. This is like the one I hear about when people talk about their favorite episodes of Better Off Ted, because it's very bold and memorable. It's got a lot of great lines and moments, but where I think it does like kind of objectively succeed is criticizing the way that a corporation responds to the claims of racism.
Yeah.
Where it's not that out of the ballpark for the boss to be like, oh, you're making a big deal out of this, or oh, it's not that bad, or even worse, which is what happens, is oh, we'll fix it, we got it, and to fix it with these like ass backwards bandages, such as, I don't know, employing white people to follow black employees around so that the sensors still work, like just fixing everything but the actual problem, everything. Spending millions of dollars to hire all these new people or whatever, these dumb interns to be like, yeah, no, but it's not our problem. Like, we fixed it. That's a fix. And that's just a bandage over a leak in a dam, basically. It's deeply funny and deeply satirical in a way that I love. And I think that the show is like succeeding in. But, there's a lot of other good stuff in this episode. Where do you want to start? Where do we want to crunch into this?
I think we can just talk about the plot where all this stuff comes up. With Lem and with the sensors, and then we can talk about the other nonsense at the end.
Yeah.
So the basic foundation of the plot, which I think we've addressed more or less, is that Lem is working in the lab and then figures out that there are new motion sensors in the whole building that sense white people and don't sense black people.
Yes.
And there's this great gag where Phil leaves the room. They're like having a fight, and every time Phil storms out, the lights turn off, and then he comes back and the lights turn on. And Lem's like, when you leave, the room goes dark, or something like that. And Phil's like, oh, I can't stay mad at you when you say things like that. It's really good.
Oh, the romance is just it's so lovable. Even that part was very funny. And the Lem like trying to jump to turn on the motion sensor and like dancing around, it's not working. You're like, oh, this is like, it doesn't show its hand right away. It's kind of like, oh, it's just a bad motion sensor. And then they they have to basically outright say, oh, I think it's racist. I think it's a racist sensor. That stuff is fantastic. I'm trying to find the part. Oh yeah, and then this basically boils down to like Lem isn't actually able to leave the office, so he stays there overnight. And you have this part where Phil comes back the next day and he's like, man, to be young again and to be able to stay in the office working all night. And he's like, I wasn't working, I was sleeping. I couldn't leave.
Yeah, and Phil's like, did you call security? And he's like, yeah, he's a great guy. He was stuck in his booth too.
Oh my god. Everything. The fact that the typical people that end up working in security, and also the racist motion sensor, and the joke about people getting to work overnight in their office and kind of like glorifying that work culture. It's a bucket of commentary.
Yeah, there's so much going on there. And then Lem is like, I'm gonna go talk to Veronica, and Phil's sort of saying, no, you're not, like what we were saying in the past episode about how he's now the one who's more low status. Then Lem gets together a bunch of African-American employees to go up to Veronica's office to be like, hey, and then as soon as they all walk in, he's like, oh god, this looks way more aggressive than I meant for it to look, which is another moment of like pretty sharp racial commentary.
We're just walking up to her, but it looks like a bunch of dudes like fight.
Right. And then I think what what you're saying about the corporate response thing, like a thing that this episode does really well is every time this problem gets to Veronica, she basically convinces them that it's going to get fixed, and
Yeah.
everybody just accepts it, which I think is indicative of just how these things operate in the workplace, that like there isn't really a person you can complain up to fix this stuff, because they'll either say like, forget you, it's not a problem, or they'll say like, yeah, totally, we're going to fix it, and then they just like don't fix it the right way. And that happens multiple times.
My thing with Viridian Dynamics, and why I made a joke in the first episode about like I would probably work here someday, is in most workplaces what's really frustrating is when you have a complaint and you know, like they have told you in the onboarding process, hey, if you feel discriminated against, talk to HR. The truth of the matter is that HR can't help you. They aim to serve the interests of the company. If you feel like you're being discriminated against, we have a hotline for people like that. And the problem is that those things often ask for your name and then use that to report against you, and you can lose job opportunities. Like the company always wants to sound like it has your interests in mind and never does. What I think is fun about Viridian Dynamics is that they never really claim to be helping. Like Veronica is, but like the corporate culture will not change, and it just, on one hand, feels like more nakedly honest than a lot of corporations, but then on the other hand is still just as devious, that she's like, guys, look, I fixed it. You should be thanking me. I fixed the algorithm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then their fix ends up being, well, first of all, the first thing when she's talking to Ted is she's like, well, the company's saying it's not racist because it's not targeting black people. They're just ignoring black people. And then the fix after they go talk to her in the office is, now what the company's done is they've hired a white person to follow every black person around and activate the sensors for them, which is dark, but also very funny.
Especially because the people they hire, and they even, the show never lets a beat drop. It's like they're also minimum wage, like uneducated kids who are just like here to make a quick buck. And the guy that follows them around is this like teenager, Stu, I think is his name. And he's like, Stu, he's a huge idiot, but he was born with the God-given talent to trigger a light sensor.
Yeah, that was good. And that's good commentary on like, you know, you can be this very qualified, successful black person, but then, you know, there could be an unqualified, incompetent white person who makes as much money as you do and is in the same position or whatever. Yeah.
This is just an incompetent guy who doesn't know what salt is. And he's like listening to his headphones being like, I think this is salt. Lem is going to like murder him.
Amazing delivery from Lem. Salt.
True anger. True anger.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lem being like truly very afraid to talk to Veronica is another relatable thing. And then like him realizing that Stu is being instructed to copy him, and they do the like trying to pantomime. I love that it's an imperfect pantomime too. Like the guy is just like not good at copying him.
God, that's so funny.
Easily the hardest laugh for me in this one was when he goes up to his coworker, and this is where I said, oh, they're swinging for the fences. He goes, oh, we all get our own white guys. My guy here, Ty, he's the best. He anticipates everything I need. He picked up my dry cleaning.
Oh, man.
And then Lem gets to be like, wait, my white guy sucks.
Yeah.
If you didn't get, it's just like the show never lets you doubt what they're trying to say, which is like, you know, we're going for the sort of reverse slavery thing, but not in a way that feels like it's punching down at anyone, but more acknowledging the power dynamics at play here and how effed up this feels to people.
Yeah. I also, in that scene, you know, they really, like you're saying, swing for the fences, because then Stu, or Lem's like, oh, my white guy sucks, or whatever, and then Stu leans into the other white guy, and he's like, I got the worst black guy. Oh my God. Yeah.
So Ted goes to Veronica, and he's like, hey, this is not getting fixed. Like, there's a problem. And she's like, you think there's a problem with our new operation? He goes, yeah, I think there's a problem with Operation White Shadow, which is that they are countering the critique that hiring all these white people is doing bad things for diversity, which the Viridian Dynamic ad in this episode is about, how it's a diverse environment full of people that look like you. And by the way, the best part of that ad is when two people shake hands at the end of it, and it's two white hands, and they're like, it's just people that look like you, for like these two guys.
Yeah.
And she's saying to counter that, now we have to hire black people to follow our black people around, which doesn't make sense because the system doesn't see them, so we need to hire more white people. And then later in a board meeting, like they do their whole like maybe we should have an affair thing that almost goes somewhere but doesn't. But in a board meeting later, Lem is like showing her all this data, and then they're trying to prove to the board why it's not financially effective to keep doing this back and forth. And he concludes that yes, if we continue to hire back and forth like this, we're going to hire the entire population of the Earth in X number of years.
And that's like the only thing that convinces them, which is sort of the final great capper on the satire here, is like the corporation is not won over by arguments about this being racist or not. They're won over by it just is too expensive. And really the thing that wins them over
is Veronica says the thing, right?
Well, Veronica says the thing, but in the presentation, Ted is like, okay, now let's talk about healthcare costs. And then...
Yeah, because he goes, we don't have the parking to fit every employee in the world. And then he goes, let's take a look at how this would affect healthcare. And they're like, oh, no.
Yeah.
And then also the fact that it's Veronica who they basically punt to be like, I guess it would make more sense to fix the sensors. And then he says, like, great idea, Veronica. That's why you're earning twice my salary. And she flashes him the 3 fingers like, I'm earning 3 times your salary.
Yeah.
Because it has to be the white person who fights for them. It has to be Phil, who is the ally for Lem. Or it has to be Veronica, who's the quote-unquote fake ally for, like, all of the black employees at VD. That finally gets not even change to happen, but just a return to the way things just were. And then the stinger of the episode being that Lem goes to take a drink from a water fountain, which... You know, the show also has a part in the middle where it's like water drinking fountain for blacks because it doesn't have a sensor on it, which, but they take a photo in front of it and they're like, I'm so happy we did this. Such a big strike for diversity at Viridian Dynamics.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah, I think a lot of the criticisms that we had about it are not necessarily criticisms of it, but more just thinking about like how the landscape has changed in the ensuing decade, and sort of what might be different about if people who are as competent at doing satire made an episode like this today, what they might change. But I think for the time, there's a lot of great stuff that it's saying about corporate culture, maybe not so much about anti-racism, but just about like how corporations are fucked up that you know, I think is worth kind of holding on to and examining.
For sure. Yeah, the modern workplace version of this is that you give everybody at your workplace a copy of the Ibram X. Kendi book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and you're like, all right, we did it, everyone's good now, right? And then that's the joke. But you know, different time period. But I think they mostly like succeed here in the attempt to satirize this like racist policy. But again, it's just going for something different. We can talk also about the B plot of this episode, which concerns Ted and Linda's continued conflict. Now we actually get to meet Don, the very tall, kind of handsome, but kind of like average looking dude who she's gotten back together with officially after breaking up with him, thinking that she was going to get with Ted for a while. I liked Don, the actor, just all right. I really liked the scene where Ted and Don get smoothies together, especially because later on they do explicitly call it a date. And I know that they mean like guys hanging out, haha, it's a date. Like they're not being that serious about it. But there was a part when I was writing my notes where I was like, is Linda worried that Ted is falling in love with Don? Does she like think that? It becomes clear pretty quickly that it's not that. Yeah, she's more jealous that, or she really wanted to get Ted to feel jealous and is frustrated that he's not, and he's actually enjoying Don's company.
Yeah,
because Don is just a nice guy who has like cool hobbies and stuff, and Ted's like, oh, I guess I don't need to hate this man. I think I just continue to find the Ted and Linda stuff like occasionally funny, but not that new or unique. Like the A plot in this episode is so it's so unique because you don't see that very often. But I've seen plenty of like she gets back with her old boyfriend and he doesn't like him, but he actually does. Oh my god. If anything, it allows Ted to be a little bit more vulnerable and kind of like wanting. And one of my favorite lines and moments in this whole episode is when she introduces Ted to Don, because at the beginning they like, open the elevator door. He holds the elevator door for Ted, and then Ted leaves on the next floor because he's like, "Oh, I don't want to be in this elevator anymore." And she comes. They go back to her cubicle. She's like, "Oh, Ted, do you remember Don, my boyfriend?" He goes, "Of course, Don. You hold a hell of an elevator door."
Yeah, it's a good line.
And then just the I know I'm just doing the lines thing, but that's like all I really have for the Ted Linda stuff is. She's like, Don. She's like basically bragging about what Don can do, and she's like, "Oh, Don speaks French. Quit, say something in French, Don." He goes, "No," and she goes, "That's awesome. That was French and funny." And Ted tries to be like, "I know a little bit of French too. J'adore le racquetball, Don." It's when they decide to go play racquetball together. I love this. I love how charming Jay Harrington can be. He's just such an affable man.
Mm-hmm.
I actually looked into what he's doing today, and like he's pretty active on social media, and he's currently in a show called SWAT, which looks really, honestly looks really boring, but he aged really well. He's like, he leaned into his white hair a lot, but it looks great. He's kind of got like white and black streaks, and his hair's a little bit longer, but he's like a SWAT team guy in this show, and that's not my favorite thing ever. He's just like military man shooting guns at bad men. It's not dope, but anyways, do you have any like comments about the Linda and Don stuff? I thought that French scene was funny, and the rest of it is like he doesn't like Don, or he does kind of.
Yeah, I don't know. It just it is what it is, right? It's just another kind of moment in this sort of back and forth between the two of them. I think I was annoyed that it ends up forcing Linda throughout the whole episode to be kind of like bitter in this way. That's not that fun.
Petty almost.
Yeah, but I thought him becoming friends with Don was kind of funny. I think the Veronica part of it is the only other part to really address, which is just that she's the one who kind of clues Ted in on what the deal is and like what Linda wants from him. And then weirdly we have this scene where Ted and Veronica are in her office, and she's like, "Oh, I've had the worst day," and he's like, "Me too." And then they almost have sex with each other again.
Yeah. Yep.
What did you think of that?
Is that Ted and Veronica stuff?
Yeah.
Why are we dredging this up again? Well, like, to what benefit is any of this?
Yeah.
It just feels like, we're bored, and these two characters have been in the same room for 5 minutes. It just feels like something for them to do together. Maybe that's like the way they're thinking about it also. I don't love it, to be honest with you. I don't hate it. I'm not like offended by it, but
yeah.
Ted and Veronica doesn't need to happen. Veronica could get with literally anybody she wants to. Doesn't have to be our boy Ted. He's gonna get with Linda at the end of the show. We already know it. Like, come on, guys. Don't need to jerk us around.
I mean, what this moment ultimately serves to do is it kind of echoes what we were talking about in the first episode, where it just shows you how willing Ted is to sort of go along with what people ask of him and want of him. And he isn't really that invested in like his own romantic life. He just sort of is going to throw down and have sex with Veronica because she like said jump and he is saying how high kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
he works on ego, or id, I guess. He just is all like, this is the thing I want in the short term. I don't care.
Yeah, and it really sells short. Him doing that really sells short all of the like Linda stuff. Like, he just doesn't care about Linda, it seems like, really at all. You know, if he's like doing all this belly aching about, well, my second office affair, blah, 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 blah. But then as soon as Veronica's like, you want to have sex again? He's like, oh, yep, I do.
I definitely do.
All my clothes. But yeah, it's dumb. I wasn't crazy about it. There was something I forgot to mention in the first episode that I was wondering your opinion on, by the way, about the second office affair thing, which is when Ted talks to Lem and he's like, so you've had multiple office affairs, right? And Lem's like, yeah, I've been all up and through this place. and then we get that cutaway where Lem is being chased by like his two girlfriends at the same time.
Weird.
Yeah, that was pretty weird, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, just the implication that he is straight at all is already strange, but he could be, I don't know, bisexual, whatever have you. And I know I'm reading into that, but like that plus the like these women chasing him feels like something out of a 50s sitcom.
Yeah, it was
like, what is this?
It's dorky. I don't know. But Anyway.
And then they both like meet they like chase him together. They like team up to fight him. It's very silly. But that's pretty much what I got. Did you have any other stray quotes or notes from this episode, Magellan?
When Lem is planning to go to Veronica's office, he has this line where he says, "Plus, if I get enough guys, maybe she won't know which one is me." Yeah.
Love
yeah.
it. Yeah.
I really liked in the Viridian Dynamics commercial, diversity. Just the thought of it makes these white people smile. It's showing the stock footage. I wonder if they're getting this from like a stock footage library or if they're filming. They can't be filming all this stuff brand new because it just looks too much like stock footage.
If they're filming it, that's incredible. I don't know how you're getting all the resources to do that and how you're doing it exactly, but I would imagine too that they're like pulling from a library, especially all the like handshaking, growing grass, and fast speed. Like that stuff. I feel like I've seen these bits of stock footage before. Yeah. Do I have any? I really like the part where Ted gets off the elevator and then Linda's like, "Ted, we didn't go anywhere. This is the same floor." And he's like, "I know. I like this floor." It's just trying to get the freak off thing. And I enjoyed Phil in this episode. Oh yeah, and Veronica trying to empathize with the black people by being like, I was
beautiful or whatever. Yeah,
I was beautiful, and I was 5'9" before everybody at 16 years old, before all the other girls, and I was judged for being too pretty and too good. So I understand what it's like to be discriminated against.
Yeah. If it wasn't for the comfort of modeling contracts and college boys, I don't know what I would have done. Yeah. And then I liked how she ended that with, "Well, my door is always open to you. Please close it on the way out." Yeah. And then the only other quote I have here is when she's talking to Ted and like adjusting his tie. A great acting moment from Portia de Rossi. She's kind of like affectionately fixing his tie while also saying this very grim thing where she's talking about how the company motto is money before people. And then saying that it's emblazoned on the lobby floor, but it just looks really heroic in Latin.
Yeah.
That was funny.
I think the wiki had a translation of money before people in Latin, and it was like not that heroic. I don't remember what it was, but it's like, yeah, you guys, that's the joke. I think that's what I got, Magellan.
Great.
Awesome. I can't do this voice anymore. Hey guys, I'm back. Whoa, sorry, the helium baby inside of me just died. Magellan, what are we watching next week on Better Off Chats?
Next time around, we're watching the next 2 episodes of Better Off Ted, but it's gonna be pretty fun.
Okay.
We are watching episodes 5 and 6. First off, episode 5, Win Some, Dose Some. Phil and Lem dose Linda with an experimental drug.
Oh,
Okay.
that could go a lot of ways.
That could go very many ways. And then episode 6, Goodbye, Mr. Chips. The gang resorts to desperate measures to get Ted his job back.
Ted gets
Whoa.
fired?
Oh, shit.
Uh-oh.
Alright.
Uh-oh. Cool. Well, I hope Ted does get his job back, because then the show would be over otherwise. But for now, this show is almost over. Let's take it to the plug zone. If you, dear listener, would like to send us questions, comments, you can send those over via email to chatspod@gmail.com. We also have a Twitter account @chatspod, where you can send your stuff over there. We're also posting about the show there occasionally. Retweet the show if you can. We have a subreddit run by our wonderful community. That's over at reddit.com/r/chatspod. And if you haven't listened to old chat seasons, we're doing that over there. We're finishing up season 1 of chats very soon. One episode a week. So we're going slow, but we're getting through it. And we have all that fun stuff. And if you like the show, one easy way to support us is to rate the podcast on iTunes or your podcast platform of choice. Another fun and easy way to support us and to get some content in return is to check out our Patreon, which can be found at patreon.com/chatspod. We have all sorts of different tiers. At $1 a month, you get Magellan's solo X-Files first-time watch podcast called The Chats Files, which is going very strong. He's almost done with, I think you're getting close to the end of season 1, sort of, right?
Yeah, I just, as of the time of this recording, did episode 18, so closing in on the end of season 1.
Very cool. Very, very cool. So you have that. At $3, you get the majority of our bonus content, including everything that's getting released, that's being voted on by the patrons, and you can vote as well. And then at $5 a month, you also get our entire backlog, which has a ton of commentaries. You can still vote on the new stuff. We have Hangout podcasts. We've played board games. We have read books. We've done all sorts of kooky, spooky stuff in the realm of TV and friends talking about things. So check that out. Again, that's patreon.com/chatspod. We really appreciate your support. Now, finally, before we end the podcast, we like to do a little mini segment here called Chatsums. I can't believe I managed to find a little jingle for that last week.
Yeah.
It's very gross. You'd be surprised if you look up like pickle crunching noise.mp3 on Google, just how many results you get.
I bet.
But I feel like I found a good one. And Chatsums, if you don't know, are basically little things that we recommend, Magellan and I recommend you check out in the interim of the episodes, be they other media, activities, experiences, what have you. Now, Magellan, what is your Chatsum for this week?
So a couple weeks ago, I think it was like 2 weeks ago when we were still doing our coverage of John Adams, you Chatsumed the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection for the Switch, which includes Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, Super Mario Galaxy. And I was playing that for a bit and really enjoying it. I'm almost fully done with Super Mario Sunshine, which is what I was really playing that collection for in the first place. And then I had told myself, like, oh, now I really want to check out the Switch Mario game, Super Mario Odyssey. But no, I'm going to finish these games first. And then I found myself, it was as if I was in a fugue state, and I awoke on the Nintendo shop screen for Super Mario Odyssey. And it
woke
said
up in a cold
purchased. Yeah.
You woke up in a cold sweat and you're like, it's a me.
I'm the Mario. And then before I knew it, I was playing Super Mario Odyssey, and it's really, really fun. I mean, I'm a few years late on it, so I'm sure if people have Switches and they like Mario, they already have it and they're already playing it. But if by some accident of fate you have not yet tried Super Mario Odyssey, it's really, really enjoyable, and I'd highly recommend it. It's, it's a Mario 3D game where you explore and find stuff and jump around and jump on things' heads and stuff, and it's what you're looking for. But
it's kind of really fun. It feels more like an open world Mario. Yeah,
it definitely is more. There's an even greater emphasis on exploration and finding all the nooks and crannies than in like 64 or Sunshine, which already were games that like were pushing in that direction. It's kind of like the realization of what those games were starting to promise, which is cool to experience.
Mario Odyssey, a game that I definitely enjoyed playing and then didn't touch as soon as I finished it, but it's a really fun, like 8 to 10 hours or whatever, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure.
You can throw your hat and then turn into things. What's better than that? Come on. Cool. Well, Magellan, I have some Chatsums as well. If you don't mind, I'm going to share them with you.
Go for it.
Thank you. Okay, so I have 3 Chatsums, and I'm going to make them quick, folks, because I know you're like trying to go home and you're on your commute and you're at the last stop and you're like, I got to get off the train, but I have to finish chats and I can't walk and listen to a podcast at the same time. I get it. Here are the 3. Number 1, Mouth Dreams. Hey guys, are you familiar with the Mouth trilogy of albums? Mouth Sounds, Mouth Silence, and the third one,
Mouth Moods, I think,
are a trilogy of, it's kind of hard to describe, remix comedy albums is what I would describe them as, basically.
That's good, yeah.
Pretty much, if you haven't heard of these, just go look up like Mouth Dreams or Mouth Sounds, and just listen to them in release order, because they kind of started as like All Star by Smash Mouth remixes, and it's like, oh, that's so cute. But they really quickly evolved into this like really deep and strange pop culture mashup thing. It's just so hard to describe. You gotta listen to the tracks. It's basically like, what if the part of the song you wanted to hear was replaced with an entirely different song that fits unnaturally well into it, and these 2 or 3 songs smushed together into an unholy mess. That's basically the trilogy. And then Mouth Dreams is the newest one, which was like pretty unceremoniously dropped with a couple days of notice by Neil Cicierega, the creator, just a week or so ago from this recording. And it's really enjoyable so far. I did not expect to see a 4th one, but They're all free because you can't really charge for an album composed entirely of samples. But yeah, definitely check out Math Dreams. It's kind of one of those things you just have to listen to. I can't describe it to you because it's so weird and funny. But yeah, it's really good stuff. I also wanted to briefly shout out Ping Pong the Animation, which is a bad name for a good anime. It is about a bunch of kids in a Japanese school on their ping pong team, and some of them take it very seriously, some of them don't. It's an 11-episode series. It's got an art style unlike any other anime I've seen in recent memory. It's really fun. It's been recommended to me for the last 4 years, and I keep forgetting to get to it, or just not getting to it, but I have recently been trying to find shorter anime to just finish and get under my belt, and I'm having a great time with it. It's some of the best looking ping pong I've ever seen in animation, period. It's really great. It's called Ping Pong the Animation. And then finally, my last chatsum is just another quick shout out to a YouTube channel I just discovered called All Gas No Breaks, which is a really strange man on the street interview channel where this guy interviews people at really strange gatherings where humans are at their most vulnerable and honest. So, pre-pandemic, he was doing a lot of big public gatherings at furry conventions and asking very honestly and kindly about what being a furry is like, or a truckers convention where there's a lot of strange people there. And now that the pandemic has prevented a lot of large public gatherings of that sort of wholesome type, the ones that we get are things like protests, both for good and bad purposes, or unsafe 4th of July beach gatherings, or the Flat Earth Conference. It doesn't have a ton of videos on there, but if it's I don't know, midnight on a Saturday, and you're I don't want to go to bed, but I want to watch something that just makes me laugh or think about something, just put on All Gas No Breaks. Watch all of his videos because there's not a ton of them, like I said. And just bear witness to the spectrum of humanity that is on display there. It's so fascinating. I've honestly sometimes thought that I could have a career in interviewing people, and the way that this guy can just pull insanity, honestly, and I don't mean to use that term pejoratively, but just the true strangeness of humanity out of people from just holding a mic up to them and being hey, what do you think about XYZ, is a sight to behold. So again, that's called All Gas No Breaks. Well, Magellan, that was a lot of fun, and I want to say thank you as always for being the rock to my hard place, and thank you, dear listener, for listening to this episode of Better Off Chats. Peace.